Anders Fogh Rasmussen, thanks for joining me on UpFront. You wrote recently that in a time of chaos, the world needs a policeman if freedom and prosperity are to prevail. And the only country that can fill that role is the United States of America. Why?
Yeah, you could start by asking who else? The UN is too weak, a declining Russia is too aggressive, a rising China is still only a regional power. So the US is the only power capable, desirable and reliable to exercise that function.
But why do we even need that function?
Because wherever you see in the world, you have the world on fire in Syria, Iraq, a failed state, in Libya, Russian aggression against Ukraine, China flexing its muscles, a rogue state, North Korea, threatening not only its neighbors but also the US with a nuclear attack. So you need a policeman to restore international law and order.
When you look at the US government around the world, many would say there are many examples of brutality and violence by the US government against civilian populations. I think, for example, the US has dropped bombs on more than 25 countries since World War II. It dropped millions of cluster bombs on Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people in those parts of the world in the 60s and 70s. Do you think the families of the victims of US bombs would see the US as a viable or credible policeman?
No, I don't think so. And police is very often not popular. But you should see this in a helicopter perspective. Action, of course, costs, but inaction may often be more costly. You could take the genocide in Rwanda in the 90s, 1 million people killed. The US didn't do anything. You can take Syria today, maybe up to 300,000 people killed, 10 million displaced out of a population of 22 million people. That's really human disaster. And take the Balkans at the early 90s, 100,000 people killed before the US finally took action. So my point is this: the US is not perfect, they have made mistakes, but inaction will often be more costly.
But isn't it about more than just making mistakes? Many would say, how can you be an enforcer of the law and also be a violator of the law? Many people around the world would say one of the great geopolitical crimes of our time occurred when the US illegally invaded Iraq in 2003 in defiance of the UN Charter. You were Danish Prime Minister, of course, at the time. You supported that US-led invasion in defiance of international law. How can you be a law enforcer and a lawbreaker at the same time?
No, but it wasn't in defiance of international law.
Oh.
No.
Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN at the time, said it was illegal.
Yeah,
the Dutch government did an inquiry, they found it was illegal. The recent British government inquiry said the legal basis was dubious. Most international lawyers say regime change wars are illegal.
But not all of them. It's still disputed, but let me tell you, the reason why we joined that operation was that Saddam Hussein had not complied with UN resolutions back from the first Gulf War in '91. That's a fact. That's why we joined the operation. We still think it had a clear UN basis.
Do you still think he had WMDs? At the time you said, quote, "This is not something we think, we know it. There is no doubt in my mind."
Yeah, because Saddam Hussein had used chemical weapons against his own population.
You were wrong.
He could easily had avoided all this by clearly stating we don't have any weapons of mass destruction any longer. But apart from that, we did not use the weapons of mass destruction as our argument for joining that operation.
Okay. You have written that not only does the United States alone have the material ability to police the world, arguably it's the world's only genuine superpower still, but also you write, quote, "Only America has the moral greatness to do it." So as a former NATO Secretary General, you don't think NATO has the moral greatness to do it? As the former Prime Minister of Denmark, you don't think your own country, Denmark, has the moral greatness of the United States? Bit of an odd position to hold.
We don't have the capability.
I know, but put aside the capability. You're saying only America has the moral greatness to do it.
Yes, and capability, and material capability, and that's the important point here. I do believe that while the US hasn't always acted correctly, they have also made mistakes. If you ask the man in the street all over the world, most of them would say America is a nation we trust.
That's not true, actually. If you look at the polling, Gallup did a poll in 2014, surveyed more than 66,000 people in 65 nations. They found that 24% of all respondents answered, 1 in 4, that the US is the greatest threat to peace in the world today. Pakistan and China fell behind. They came second and third with 8 and 6%. So a plurality of people in a global poll said, actually, we think the US is the biggest threat. You want the US to be a policeman for those same people. How does that work?
Of course, they will answer like that because the US is the only one which today acts as a policeman. So all criticism will always be directed against that policeman.
Maybe they think like that because they see not just mistakes, as you rather diplomatically put it, but actual human rights abuses, crimes. You speak of morality and moral greatness. Do you know how many of the 18 UN human rights instruments the US has ratified?
No, but too few, I'm sure, because in the US...
5 out of 18, yeah, less than 1 in 3.
We know that in
That's
the US
shocking.
there is a lot of criticism of the United Nations. And I don't agree with those critics because the US has really profited from the world order that was created by President Truman after the Second World War, including the UN.
Indeed they have, and it's a world order that you say they should lead. Many American presidents say they want to lead, and yet they don't want to be part of the rules governing that world order. The United States is the only country in the world not to ratify the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It isn't part of the Kyoto Climate Change Protocol. It isn't part of the International Criminal Court. It refuses to sign the Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Convention to ban cluster bombs. It hasn't even ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is your world policeman.
Yeah, it is.
Your law enforcement agency, really.
Yeah, because who else? I mean, you can easily...
Who else is not the best of arguments?
Yes, it is, because who else can restore law and order in the world? You only have the US.
How can you restore law and order if you don't sign up to those laws, if you won't sign up to the International Criminal Court? So I'm a policeman, I'm going to arrest you, but I don't accept the local court's jurisdiction or the national court.
It is very interesting that so many people all over the world want to go to the US. Because they trust the US, because they are attracted by this society, and that is the moral greatness of this nation.
No one is questioning that aspect of the argument. Yes, many people come to the United States for democracy, for the economy, for all sorts of other socio-economic, cultural reasons. We're talking about being a policeman, taking action around the world in conflict zones. And I'm saying to you, how can you trust the United States to do that, given they won't sign up to basic human rights treaties, basic international law conventions?
Because I know from experience, nationally as well as internationally, that if you want things to be done, ask the United States. That's why.
In your recent Wall Street Journal op-ed, you suggested that the US under President Obama has been isolationist and referred to, quote, the Obama administration's reluctance to lead the world. It's a common criticism we hear of President Obama, especially on the right. But isn't the reality that this is a President, Barack Obama, who spent more on the US military than George W. Bush did, done more drone strikes than George W. Bush did, carried out regime change in Libya, and is currently bombing ISIL in both Iraq and Syria? That's isolationist?
No, it's interventionism, and I support President Obama in all that respects. For me, this is not a question about a Republican or Democrat in the White House. I'm opposed to isolationism in all camps.
Why are you accusing the Obama administration, which is very interventionist, as you concede, of being isolationist?
No, because he has said clearly that the United States has made more mistakes using military power than not using military power. I don't agree with him, and it's a very dangerous statement when a US president says it, because it sends a very dangerous signal to autocrats and terrorists all over the world.
Maybe so, yet President Obama has dropped 23,000 bombs on 6 different countries in 2015 alone. He's not this reluctant warrior that some on the right, including yourself, say he is.
Yeah, he tells us himself that he is. So it's not a secret.
Well, who cares what he says? Let's look at the actions. 23,000 bombs in 6 different countries, and you say reluctance to lead the world.
Yeah.
If that's not intervention, what is intervention?
No, but I can point to concrete actions. But first,
I'm pointing at concrete actions. 23,000 bombs, 6 countries.
And I will first and foremost
what do you want, 12 countries?
Statements.
18 countries?
But if you take Syria, for instance, he defined some red lines. They were crossed several times, and that was a...
Yes, he is bombing ISIL in Syria.
But
let's not forget that.
Yeah, but finally he defined a red line that couldn't be crossed. He threatened Assad to strike Syria, and Assad realized now it's better that I remove the chemical weapons, and so he did. So it's another example that the mere threat of military force, using military force, can facilitate political solutions. And that's my point in my book. That's why you need American leadership.
Okay. One of the reasons Donald Trump has attracted support from a lot of disillusioned Americans, anti-establishment Americans, is because amidst all of the blatant lies that he tells, he does seem to tell them a single truth about American wars, that they have failed to make the US secure, they've led to the pointless deaths of thousands of American soldiers, and they've cost the American taxpayer trillions of dollars that could have been spent better at home.
Yeah, but his statements demonstrate that you're not right when you claim that the Republicans criticize Obama.
I didn't say Republicans, I said people on the right.
Yeah,
yes.
but people
Trump
on the right.
is sui generis, I think we can say.
But it's a fact that since the 20s and 30s you have had these isolationist sentiments in deeply rooted in the American population.
But deal with the wider point about he's attracting Americans with a message that is a credible message. Yeah, but they have spent trillions of dollars and they aren't any safer.
Yeah, but yes, I'm opposed to that because I know that when America retreats, they would leave behind a vacuum. That vacuum globally will be filled by the bad guys. And that's exactly what we have seen when Putin advances, when Islamic State advances, etc.
Do you worry about a Donald Trump presidency? He's clearly not a fan of NATO, which you were Secretary General of for 5 years.
I'm very much concerned about his statements on NATO because he has raised doubts about the American commitment to defending all allies, and President Putin might be tempted to test the resolve of NATO.
Do you believe, as former CIA chief Michael Morell does, that Trump is a, quote, unwitting agent of the Russian government, that he's basically not just deferring to, but helping to advance Vladimir Putin's agenda on issues like NATO in places like Crimea?
Well, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that President Putin would drink a glass of champagne if Mr. Trump were elected President of the United States.